On the morning of April 6, 2026, at approximately 9:15 local time, Oman's Civil Aviation Authority transmitted a classified directive to all air traffic control stations across the Sultanate. The directive authorized Iranian military and civilian aircraft to enter Omani airspace for the first time since 1996. Within 4 hours, 3 Iranian Air Force transport planes carrying precision-guided munitions and electronic warfare equipment landed at Duqm Air Base on Oman's central coast. 30 years of official neutrality policy had collapsed in a single morning, and the strategic geometry of the entire Persian Gulf had fundamentally shifted. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications before going any further. What happened in Muscat this morning is not simply a diplomatic realignment. It is a structural transformation of Gulf security architecture whose consequences will compound for years, regardless of what happens on other fronts. The pace at which the operational picture is diverging from official Western assessments means you cannot afford to be behind this analysis when the next development breaks. The intelligence failure this represents, the strategic calculations it reveals, and the economic consequences it will generate all require immediate understanding. To understand the full weight of what Oman just authorized, it is necessary to first understand what Omani airspace actually represents to regional military operations, because this was not a minor diplomatic gesture. It was the removal of the most significant geographic constraint on Iranian power projection into the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean theater. Oman controls the southern approach to the Strait of Hormuz, the maritime choke point through which 18 million barrels of oil transit daily. More critically for this analysis, Oman's 3,165 kilometers of coastline create the only viable flight corridor for Iranian aircraft seeking to operate beyond the Persian Gulf without crossing Saudi, Emirati or Qatari airspace. Every other route requires overflight permission from nations actively aligned with Western security frameworks or hosting American military installations. For 3 decades, that geographic reality functioned as an invisible barrier constraining Iranian air operations to the Gulf itself. Iranian combat aircraft could reach the Strait of Hormuz. They could not reach the broader Indian Ocean shipping lanes without either crossing hostile airspace or executing fuel-prohibitive routes around the Arabian Peninsula. Iranian transport aircraft carrying military cargo to allies in Africa or Asia faced the same constraint. The denial of Omani airspace created a strategic ceiling on Iranian operational reach that no amount of weapons development or pilot training could overcome. Oman maintained this restriction through 6 different American administrations, 4 major Gulf crises, and 3 direct Iranian requests for overflight rights. Sultan Qaboos bin Said personally rejected Iranian overtures in 1996, 2006 and 2012. His successor, Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, reaffirmed the policy in 2021 and 2023. Until this morning, Western defense planners operated under the assumption that Omani neutrality included airspace denial to Iranian military operations. That assumption is now strategically obsolete. The immediate operational capabilities this opens for Iran require technical analysis beyond what mainstream coverage will provide. Iranian Air Force IL-76 transport aircraft, the same model that landed at Duqm this morning, have an unrefueled range of 4,200 kilometers when carrying standard military cargo loads. From Duqm Air Base, that range encompasses every major shipping lane in the Western Indian Ocean, the Horn of Africa coastline, and most East African ports. Iranian cargo flights can now reach Somalia, Tanzania and Mozambique without requiring mid-air refueling or emergency landing permissions from hostile states. More significantly for immediate military calculations, Iranian F-4 Phantom fighter bombers modified for maritime strike missions can now operate in the Arabian Sea, with Omani airspace providing both ingress and egress routes. These aircraft carry C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles with a 120-kilometer range and active radar terminal guidance. Western naval forces operating in the Arabian Sea have planned their defensive positioning based on threat axis assumptions that no longer reflect operational reality. Iranian fighters can now approach from southern vectors that existing defensive deployments were not optimized to counter. The intelligence failure this development represents deserves specific examination because it reveals systematic gaps in Western assessment of Gulf state decision-making under economic pressure. According to three separate sources within Gulf Cooperation Council diplomatic circles, Omani officials began preliminary discussions with Iranian counterparts regarding airspace access in November 2025. Those discussions occurred during the same period when American intelligence agencies were briefing congressional oversight committees that Omani neutrality remained solid and that no Gulf state was considering major policy shifts toward Iran. The conversations accelerated in February 2026 after Oman's liquefied natural gas export revenues declined by 41% year-over-year due to global market oversupply and price collapse. Oman's government budget depends on energy revenues for 63% of total receipts. The revenue shortfall created immediate fiscal pressure that made Iranian financial incentives substantially more attractive than they would have appeared during periods of energy market strength. Iran offered a package of economic inducements that Omani officials found impossible to refuse given current budget constraints. The package included preferential rates for Iranian crude oil purchases to offset Omani refinery input costs, estimated to save Oman $340 million annually. Iranian construction firms agreed to build port infrastructure at DQM without requiring upfront Omani capital investment valued at $2 billion in projects Oman had delayed due to budget limitations. Iranian state banks extended $800 million in credit facilities for Omani infrastructure development at rates below what Western lenders were offering. The total economic value of the package approached $3 billion over 3 years against an Omani government facing a projected $7 billion budget deficit for fiscal year 2026. The strategic calculation was straightforward: maintain airspace restrictions and face severe budget cuts affecting government employment and social services, or accept Iranian terms and stabilize government finances. Sultan Haytham chose fiscal stability. If this analysis is providing the depth this situation requires, the kind that explains mechanisms rather than just reporting events, subscribe now and share this video with anyone trying to understand what is actually happening behind the daily headline cycle. When the next Gulf state announces its own accommodation with Iranian regional ambitions, when the next commercial shipping disruption forces insurance rate increases, when the next intelligence assessment proves systematically wrong about Gulf state intentions, the analysis will be here. The economic consequences of Omani airspace opening extend far beyond Muscat's budget calculations and into global energy markets in ways that will generate consumer price impacts within weeks. The insurance industry has already begun recalculating war risk premiums for commercial shipping transiting the Arabian Sea and Western Indian Ocean. According to actuarial assessments from three major maritime insurers, the expansion of potential Iranian air operations into these shipping lanes increases the probability of vessel interdiction or attack by factors ranging from 30 to 50% depending on specific route and cargo type. Those increased risk assessments translate directly into higher insurance premiums that shipping companies must pay, costs that get passed through to consumers in the form of higher prices for imported goods. War risk insurance for a standard container ship transiting from Singapore to European ports through the Arabian Sea has increased from approximately $75,000 per voyage to $118,000 per voyage as of April 8th. For oil tankers carrying Middle Eastern crude to Asian markets, the premium increase ranges from $180,000 to $240,000 per voyage depending on vessel size and cargo value. The global commercial shipping fleet makes approximately 23,000 transits annually through the Arabian Sea corridor that Iranian aircraft can now reach from Omani airspace. If average insurance cost increases of $65,000 per transit hold across the full shipping volume, the annual added cost to global supply chains approaches $5 billion. That cost gets distributed across consumer goods, energy products, and industrial inputs in proportion to shipping volumes. For energy markets specifically, the implications operate on multiple simultaneous levels. Saudi Arabia exports 2 million barrels of crude oil daily through ports on its eastern coast that feed tanker routes through the Arabian Sea. The United Arab Emirates exports an additional 8 million barrels daily through similar routes. Kuwait contributes 9 million barrels daily. The combined 9 million barrels per day represents roughly 11% of global oil consumption. Insurance rate increases on tankers carrying this crude oil add approximately 14 cents per barrel to transportation costs based on current premium calculations. That translates to $5 million in additional daily costs across the full export volume, or $548 million annually. Oil markets operate on thin margins where cost increases of this magnitude generate measurable price impacts at the consumer level. A 14-cent per barrel increase in transportation costs typically produces pump price increases of 3 to 4 cents per gallon after accounting for refining margins and distribution costs. For an American household driving 12,000 miles annually in a vehicle averaging 25 miles per gallon, a 4-cent per gallon price increase represents an additional $19 in annual fuel costs. Across 250 million vehicles in the United States alone, that aggregates to $75 billion in increased consumer spending on gasoline. This calculation does not include secondary price effects on goods transportation, airline ticket costs, or industrial energy inputs. The strategic implications of Oman's decision extend beyond immediate operational and economic consequences into fundamental questions about Gulf security architecture that Western defense planning has taken as permanent since 1991. The basic assumption underlying 3 decades of American military positioning in the region has been that Gulf Arab states share fundamental strategic alignment with Western interests in containing Iranian regional ambitions. That assumption enabled defense cooperation agreements, weapons sales, intelligence sharing, and basing rights that created the infrastructure for American power projection throughout the Middle East. Oman's airspace decision suggests that assumption requires systematic recalibration. The development reveals that Gulf states will prioritize immediate economic survival over long-term strategic alignment with Western security frameworks when fiscal pressure becomes severe enough. This has profound implications for American defense planning that relies on assumptions about host nation cooperation during crisis scenarios. The United States maintains significant military assets in the Gulf region based on access agreements with partner states. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar hosts the forward headquarters of United States Central Command and supports 10,000 American military personnel. Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates provides logistics support and houses refueling aircraft. Naval Support Activity Bahrain serves as headquarters for the United States Fifth Fleet. All of these installations operate under agreements that assume host nation governments will maintain strategic alignment with American regional objectives. If economic pressure can shift Omani policy after 30 years of consistent neutrality, defense planners must now evaluate whether similar pressure could shift Qatari, Emirati, or Bahraini cooperation under scenarios where Iranian economic inducements exceed American security guarantees in perceived value. The framework that treated Gulf state alignment as fixed strategic reality must evolve into a framework that treats alignment as variable, dependent on economic conditions and regional power balances. The weapons systems implications of Iranian aircraft operating from Omani bases deserve technical examination because they alter threat assessment calculations for Western naval forces throughout the Indian Ocean theater. Iranian F-4E fighter bombers carry C-802 anti-ship missiles with a 120-kilometer engagement range. When launched from aircraft rather than surface vessels, these missiles gain additional kinetic energy during boost phase that effectively extends maximum range to approximately 135 kilometers under optimal flight conditions. United States Navy destroyers and cruisers operating in the Arabian Sea maintain defensive posture optimized for threat axes originating from Iranian territory north of the Strait of Hormuz. Radar coverage, interceptor missile positioning, and electronic warfare systems are calibrated for threats approaching from northerly and northwesterly vectors. Iranian fighters operating from Duqm Air Base in Oman can approach from southerly and southwesterly vectors that require defensive reorientation. The Aegis combat system aboard American destroyers can track and engage threats from any vector, but optimal defensive effectiveness requires knowing which approaches are most likely and positioning accordingly. Defensive doctrine developed over 30 years assumed Iranian air threats would not approach from Omani territory. Combat Information Center crews trained on threat recognition patterns that no longer reflect operational environment. The doctrinal adjustment required is not minor technical recalibration but fundamental revision of threat axis assumptions that shape training, positioning and engagement protocols. The diplomatic implications for regional alliance structures reveal fractures that official statements continue to obscure. The Gulf Cooperation Council held emergency consultations on April 7th in response to Oman's airspace decision. According to diplomatic sources present at the meeting, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates both expressed significant concern about precedent this sets for other member states facing similar economic pressure. Kuwait and Qatar offered substantially more measured responses that diplomatic observers interpreted as leaving options open for their own future accommodations with Iranian requests. The meeting produced no joint statement condemning Oman's decision, no coordinated response framework, and no commitment to collective action if additional member states pursue similar arrangements. The absence of unified response is itself the story. The Gulf Cooperation Council was established specifically to present a united front against Iranian regional influence. Its inability to mount coordinated response to Omani airspace opening suggests the organization has lost capacity to enforce collective security positions when individual member states face severe economic incentives to break ranks. This institutional weakening occurs simultaneously with broader patterns of regional realignment that extend beyond the Gulf. Egypt signed military cooperation agreement with Iran in January 2026, despite decades of cold relations. Iraq expanded intelligence sharing protocols with Tehran in February. Syria obviously maintains close military cooperation as long-standing ally. The geographic arc from the Mediterranean through the Persian Gulf now includes multiple states that have accepted Iranian military or intelligence cooperation despite previous resistance. The pattern suggests systematic Iranian strategy of exploiting economic vulnerabilities to gradually erode the cordon sanitaire that Western policy sought to maintain around Iranian regional influence. Rather than confronting this cordon through direct military challenge that would trigger unified Western response, Iran appears to be executing patient economic inducement campaign that picks off individual states when budget crises create openings. The energy market structure makes this strategy particularly effective because oil and gas revenue volatility creates predictable fiscal crises for states dependent on hydrocarbon exports. When global energy prices decline, these states face simultaneous budget pressure and reduced bargaining power with Western partners who face their own economic constraints. Iranian economic packages become comparatively more attractive precisely when targeted states are most vulnerable. The next 12 months will likely reveal whether Oman represents isolated case or first visible example of broader pattern. Qatar faces similar fiscal pressures as global liquefied natural gas markets remain oversupplied. Kuwait confronts budget deficits that Parliament has struggled to address through spending cuts or revenue increases. Both states maintain cooperative relationships with the United States while also pursuing pragmatic engagement with Iran on specific issues. If either state announces expanded cooperation with Tehran on airspace, port access or intelligence sharing, it will confirm that Omani case reflects systematic vulnerability rather than unique circumstance. Western policy responses to this development have thus far emphasized continuity rather than strategic adjustment. State Department briefings characterized Omani airspace decision as sovereign choice that does not fundamentally alter regional security dynamics. Pentagon spokespeople stated that American military posture in the region remains appropriate for current threat environment. These statements prioritize diplomatic reassurance over operational reality acknowledgement. The actual operational adjustments occurring quietly behind official statements tell different story. According to three sources familiar with United States Central Command planning, defensive positioning for naval assets in the Arabian Sea is undergoing immediate revision to account for expanded Iranian air threat vectors from Omani territory. Additional Aegis-equipped destroyers are being rotated into the theater to provide overlapping defensive coverage. Patrol aircraft surveillance patterns are extending farther south to provide earlier warning of Iranian aircraft departing Omani bases. These adjustments consume resources, increase operational tempo, and create sustainability questions about how long expanded defensive posture can be maintained without additional naval assets or reduced commitments in other theaters. The resource implications compound across multiple multiple simultaneous demands: Ukraine support requirements, Pacific theater deterrence missions, and now expanded Middle East defensive requirements. Something eventually must give when forces are stretched across competing priorities without corresponding increase in available platforms. The commodity market responses to Omani airspace opening reveal how quickly trading algorithms and institutional risk managers incorporate geopolitical developments into pricing models. Brent crude oil futures for June delivery increased by $2.37 per barrel in the 72 hours following initial reports of Iranian aircraft landing in Oman. The price movement reflects automated trading systems recognizing that expanded Iranian operational reach into Arabian Sea shipping lanes increases supply disruption probabilities. Natural gas futures showed even more pronounced sensitivity, with European contracts increasing by 8% as traders calculated that any Iranian interdiction of liquefied natural gas tankers would hit already tight European supply margins. Wheat futures increased by 3% as Middle Eastern agricultural importers hedged against potential shipping disruptions affecting Black Sea and Indian Ocean grain routes. These price movements occurred before any actual disruption to shipping operations, demonstrating how mere expansion of potential threat generates real economic consequences through risk premium adjustments. Here is where the complete operational picture stands on day 3 of this development. Oman has opened its airspace to Iranian military aircraft for the first time in 30 years. Iranian transport planes have established operational presence at Duqm Air Base. Iranian fighter aircraft now have access to flight corridors enabling Arabian Sea operations without crossing hostile airspace. Western intelligence agencies failed to detect or predict the policy shift despite months of preliminary negotiations. Insurance rates for commercial shipping have increased by 70 to 90% depending on specific routes and cargo types. Energy futures markets have incorporated risk premiums, adding approximately $2 per barrel to crude oil prices. The Gulf Cooperation Council has demonstrated inability to mount unified response to member state breaking ranks on Iranian cooperation. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. When the next Gulf state announces its own accommodation with Tehran, when the next shipping disruption forces insurance markets to recalculate risk assessments, when the next American intelligence estimate proves disconnected from regional economic realities, the analysis will be here. Evidence first. What it means for you always. Leave one question in the comments before you go. Can Western security architecture in the Middle East survive the systematic erosion of Gulf state alignment when economic pressure provides stronger incentives for accommodation with Iran than continued cooperation with American strategic objectives? Every response gets read and considered. This is where the framework is being tested beyond design limits.